Okay, welcome again, everybody, and for our second program for this morning, we have an actual. We have the Pāṇini house, the Pāṇini annex nearby, but now we have a Pāṇiniya, but actually in the flesh. So today we'll have somebody who will speak to the grammar traditions, and hopefully we'll have a little conversation. I've already introduced Dr. Trivedi, but I'll do it again. Dr. Mittal Trivedi is holds a doctorate in, I don't know what the department is, but it's Pāṇinian studies and linguistics, that sort of thing, from the University of Cagliari in Sardinia, and has worked on not only traditional Pāṇinian scholarship and Pāṇinian traditions, but also its pedagogical reception and how those traditions continue into the modern day, into the modern period. And so I'm sure there'll be a lot of things to discuss and talk about right now and later this afternoon. But in the meantime, I'm going to have Dr. Trivedi, or we'll just call her Mittal. I know it's doctor stuff, but we have to at least start, with that. And then now we're just ordinary people.
Mittal's fine. Titles and all are fine in a professional environment, but this is hardly that. I think my specialization is in general Pāṇinian studies, the Pāṇinian grammatical tradition. And I say tradition because it's such a vast field. And what I focused on was the transmission of the grammar itself, right? We all know that Pāṇini was BC. So from the BC all the way until now, how has the tradition been transmitted? What have been the changes introduced into it? Because we have so many grammarians who've done work on it, and we have so many texts that have come out of it. There's a Pāṇinian tradition, and then there's a not so Pāṇinian tradition, right? I don't know how familiar everyone is with all of that, but if anyone's curious, feel free to ask. We can touch on a few of those topics as well. But so the grammatical tradition and transmission and pedagogy, and because believe it or not, there are different ways that Pāṇini has been taught. It's been addressed in very different contexts and in very different ways. Across different ideological groups, because India has a lot of them, and also as we as we progress into the 20th and the 21st centuries, we have a lot of different, even Western methods of approaching Pāṇini. As I think a lot of us might have experienced. And as a whole, I also kind of touch on the intellectual traditions in general, because the thing about Vyakarana is that it is the base for Sanskrit. Anything we touch in Sanskrit has a foundation of Vyakarana. And if you don't know Vyakarana, it's difficult to understand everything else, right? Vyakarana is Shabda Shastra, right? The Shastra of words. And how do you understand words? By learning the grammar. Now, grammar is also a bit of a problematic term, right? Vyakarana is vyakriyante, vyutpadyante. It has this whole etymology that just essentially says Vyakarana is that which helps you to explain, to understand words. So it's not about rules. It's not about set rules that we have to just memorize and then, it's written in stone and we just understand the way it's taught. It's not, like everything in Sanskrit, it's fluid. It has this element of fluidity to it, this malleability to it, while at the same time codifying the structure of a language, which is what's so wonderful about it that I did an entire thesis on it. Yeah. I think Deven was talking about how
Well,
the Siddhanta Kaumudi kind of.
well, yeah, well, I mean, maybe we can just, maybe we can just, maybe we can just pick it up right from what you just said about that, that there's grammar, and then there's word, and there's rules, but it's not, but rules are not language as such. These are just ways of dividing words up and finding patterns and that sort of thing. So one of the things that always amazes me about Pāṇini, which is what I think, and I wanted to begin by reciting the famous verse, but I
Can do it now.
we can. Maybe we'll do it at the end,
Yeah.
Indira's giving me the look. We should do it now. We should do it now. Okay. So
I think it can be practiced in just vocalization.
Well,
I think everyone should be able to.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So why don't you recite the first pada, and I will
Okay.
do it in that way.
Yeah. Yenakshara samamnayam
Yenakshara samamnayam
adhigamya maheshwarat
Adhigamya maheshwarat
krutsnam vyakaranam proktam
Kritsnam vyakaranam proktam
tasmai pāṇinaye namaha.
Tasmai Pāṇinaye namaha. Sorry, Bhagavan Pāṇini, we were a little late to the game. Doing after we already began. We should have started with this homage to the great Pāṇini.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question that I had about Pāṇini is that what's so wonderful about him and his work is that he folds into these, because it's a rule-based system, right? That there are all these sutras which kind of create these domains and sets and kind of controls, or not controls, but allows us to kind of capture everything. Mm-hmm. But language always escapes that. It seeps out. Words, usages, styles, all these things. And if Pāṇini is covering, kritsnam, everything, how does he do that? And he does it by having all of these ideas about options. And he has all these different techniques. So can you speak a little bit of how the organic, the organism aspect of a language remains even when this kind of machine-like patterning might overwhelm that? How does those two things work together to create the grammar?
Yeah. So the fascinating thing about Pāṇinian grammar is it's not like I said, set in stone, right? It gives us these rules, but there's also room for interpretation, and we can see that based on the different types of dhatu pathas that we have, right? We have many dhatu pathas. Dhatu patha is a collection of verbal roots that are eventually used in grammar. Now, we can see that over the years, over the centuries, there are different types of dhatu pathas. And scholars have done critical studies on dhatu pathas, trying to understand how the meanings have changed, or where something came from, where a certain change came from in a certain dhatu patha. But that can be attributed to how the language evolves, right? The form of the dhatu might remain the same, but the meaning changes, or we have the form also changing, but it means something that is strange. You wouldn't expect it from that form of dhatu. So essentially, there's a derivational change or there's a semantic change, right? And that derivational change, oftentimes, then there's also that split if that derivational change follows Pāṇini or whether it does not follow Pāṇini, right? And where it doesn't follow Pāṇini, we can see instances of exceptions in kavya, for example, right? Where there's a lot of discussion in the commentaries that this is not Pāṇinian or this is something strange. So Kavi, we just attribute it to the Kavi's great mind that this is a form that should be accepted. This is poetic license. That's language evolving. At the same time, the form that remained true to Pāṇini but changed semantically, that is also a beautiful thing in itself, seeing that it adhered to Pāṇini's rules. Someone was thinking about doing that they want to stay within the structure of Pāṇini, right? So that's something beautiful that often comes up. Within the bounds of scholarship, like pure, hard scientific scholarship, there's very little room to navigate this at times. But when you stop and think about it, you can think of all the human things that could have gone into this, because as a society, society is always changing and evolving, developing, right? And these are the changes that kind of seep into the grammar and makes it fun to study. I imagine this is also something that happened with Pāṇini's optionality, right?
Because on some level, Pāṇini was acknowledging as he was describing this language that, oh, well, I guess there's, it could go this way, it could go that way, and he had to find a way to put that into these rules, right? Yeah,
and he has 3 levels of optionality. There's one optionality that's absolute, that it's either this or this, right? In a certain context, you use one form, and in another context, you use a different form. In another type of optionality, I might might mix up some of this, but I think maybe Indiraji can help me. And then in another optionality, you can have both forms interchangeably. You can use both the forms that are taught. And there's a third optionality that gives it under the name of a certain rishi, right? Bharadwaj or Shaunaka rishi. And it says, this person gave this form, and that has its own restrictions along with that sutra, with that rule. So Pāṇini himself, right, that long ago, left some space for this kind of optionality that can be accounted for in the language itself. So we can't think of it as too much of a stretch if we make certain similar interpretations about stuff we see, like in the Dhatupata example, for example, right?
And we can kind of almost feel, as it were, the human, the ghost in the machine, that you actually feel him struggling with doubt. We talk about optionality as linked with doubt, as linked with confusion. But there's a kind of a scientific way of dealing with confusion and doubt, right? And there's a way of folding it into your work, which is really wonderful as well. So Pāṇini's humanity kind of comes out, and that's one of many ways in which it comes out, perhaps.
Yeah, and it leaves an indication for us that it's a language, it's a living thing, that it's going to have optionalities, it's going to have variations, and it needs to be acknowledged. And the most interesting thing to see about this is that he does it all respectfully, and that's also the grammatical tradition. All the grammarians, if they were refuting their predecessor, they did it all respectfully. And this is one of the key points also of one of the most contentious issues of grammar is this person called Bhattoji Dikshita. And we were going into Navya Vyakarana, the new Vyakarana of, I think, the 17th century. He introduced a lot of changes. There are people, like his predecessors also introduced some changes, but they all did it with the utmost humility, that everyone acknowledged their guru, and then they presented a different interpretation. And that, luckily scholarship is catching up to that. And there's a lot of studies in how Bhattoji Dikshita also presented all of this without refuting, but while also calmly, just gently also inserting this into the parampara, into the tradition, to say, okay, let's consider this as well. And if not in his lifetime, maybe after him, his descendants, his intellectual descendants might consider, okay, this is something we should take into account, right? So it's that that respect and also that acknowledgement, letting go of a little bit of that asha, that I will be recognized. It's continuing that tradition as well.
And speaking of the respect, I mean, there's two points that I take away from this so far. Is that one of them is that that there is no loss of the scientificity, if you will, the scientific nature of what he's doing by bringing in doubt, by bringing in flexibility into the system, which kind of is a good role model, really, of how one can actually continue to do this work. You don't have to be airtight and then be angry if something deviates from what you think it should be and what you've staked a whole career on or something, right? There's a different mentality of how one does work like that. Second thing was, I was thinking about the famous dictum, because it's a respectful tradition, of Uttarottaranam Muninam Pramanyam, right? Or
Uttarottaram Muninam
Muninam Pramanyam, right? The idea that somehow the authority is not the original person.
Yeah.
The authority is the most recent person.
Yeah. Every subsequent person is more authoritative than the previous.
And this
one.
goes
It's
against
considered more of an
this goes
authority,
against the usual thing where we're always looking for the most ancient source. But in a tradition, the most recent source is as good as is better than the ancient source, because there's no difference. It's just the same tradition. And that ancient source is not deviating from that. So you get the one with the bird's eye view of everything that preceded.
Yeah, but that only applies to the Trimuni.
But
that
the
only
Trimunis.
applies to
Not to the other ones.
Yeah,
Okay.
Pāṇini, Katyayana, and Patanjali. Yeah, otherwise my word might be no.
That's true.
I don't think I'm there yet. Pāṇini, Katyayana, and Patanjali. And the Patanjali, if this is the same Patanjali as that of the Yoga Sutras, is still in dispute. Yeah, because there's a bit of a... But there are indications, because they both seem to have some Buddhist influence. So they seem to share that trait, kind of.
Professor Sharma used to, of course, he stayed away from such speculations about, or dates. Yeah, I mean, he was very...
traditional.
But he was also kind of allergic to...
a historicist perspective.
And going in directions which would not lead to any kind of edification, if you will, in a certain way, right? So, but he once said, well, that Patanjali is a great name, because Patanjali actually is the author and the kind of a forebear of works that are intended to purify the mind, speech, and the body. Yeah. Because the Ashtanga Hridaya of Patanjali is the great Ayurvedic work. The Yoga Sutra is the great Patanjali of the mind, and the Patanjali of speech is Shesha Patanjali. So Patanjali is really the same name for all three aspects of a person, that need purification.
Yeah.
Quite wonderful way of thinking about these names.
Yeah, but interestingly, reading the Mahabhashya, you will lose all of your asha. So. But the another interesting thing about this is, like, going back to the theme that it's the language of the gods. It's when you look at the Trimuni, there is the comprehensive work of the Trimuni does make you realize how the Sanskrit commentarial tradition has developed a complexity in an age where that was truly unique. So Pāṇini codified a language that he observed around him, right? He was in an area like the present-day Afghanistan. That was where he's from. So that was like the frontier region of where Sanskrit, with regards to Sanskrit, that was the frontier region of what was considered the Bharatavarsha at that time. And so the Sanskrit that he observed was a mix of everything. And then it's also has a proximity to Takshila, right? The ancient university. So there's a lot going on, which we can see in Pāṇini's work as well. And then a couple centuries after him came Katyayana, who added stuff that he thought Pāṇini might have not thought of or missed out on for whatever reason. And those became the Vartikas. And the Vartikas also add a little bit of optionality to Pāṇini's rules. And a few centuries after Katyayana came Patanjali. And what Patanjali did was he created this discussion. In a discussion-like format, he expounded on the rules of Pāṇini and the Vartikas of Katyayana. And the tradition is such that you can't study Pāṇini without the Vartikas of Katyayana. They're embedded within the sutras. Like, you have to know the Vartikas of Katyayana to understand, to study Pāṇini, right? There are some purists that just focus on Pāṇini itself, on Pāṇini himself. But generally, you tend to have people who study all three of these, because you can only understand understand Pāṇini through the other two. The pure sutra format does not allow instant illumination. So it's the sense that this is a heavenly language, right? It allows us to maybe become a little bit closer with the universe, is also rooted in this tradition. That's what I feel based on my studies, that it's about this comprehensive nature. We have to understand all of it to understand some of it. Right? As with everything in Sanskrit, you have to study everything to be able to understand maybe a little bit of it. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to have another presentation, a full presentation with some slides coming up after lunch, but we have about 5 minutes, and it would be really nice to just have please make her work a little bit, pepper her with questions or comments, and be really nice.
Yeah. So in my presentation later on, I do have some examples that we will go into, but if there's anything else, I would be happy to answer the questions right now.
This is just sort of maybe from a little bit out of the normal mode of this, but my field watches language arise in the brain. Mm-hmm. And of course we see it as a dynamic system, and somewhere along the way you get a grammarian who codifies everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm just curious, is there a way to look at what was the content of the things before the codification, mm-hmm. and whether or not the codification itself, sort of like the observer changes the observed, how the language then grew and changed post this sort of routinization or this mm-hmm. codification. Can you see that in the history, in the record, a kind of a looseness before and a non-looseness after? Yeah. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so Sanskrit grammar is on a system of utsarga and apavada. Uh-huh. You have what is the norm and then what's an exception. Right? You learn the norms. You know that these are the norms. Right. And then once the norms are established, they teach the apavadas. Then the rest of the shastra is apavadas. So the exceptions are what are the focus of learning once you establish the baseline. Right? It's like a doctor's test, right? They do a stress test, they establish your baseline first, and then they make you run and see what's wrong with it. Or what's wrong with everything else. It feels like that's what Pāṇini established some way. He did a stress test, the rest of the Shastra is stress test. And then you stumble through it, see how your heart rate rises and falls and remains the same. It truly can become quite tedious, especially with anyone who's experienced the verbal system, like lit lakara is one of my favorites for that, because when you do the reduplication, when you create the forms, you feel like you're in outer space, you're just floating around, right? So with regards to the other part of your question, I feel like the Vedas, and more specifically to Shabda Shastra, the Nirukta is a text that might answer your question. Because first, we don't have anything older than the Nirukta, and there used to be other Niruktas and a work called the Sangraha, which was it's supposed to be a really huge piece of work on etymology.
And it's pre-Pāṇini, but
Yeah.
there must have been other grammarians.
Yeah, absolutely. There were other grammarians, because he quotes Shakatayana and Bharadwaja and all of these, right? Shakalya. There were other grammarians, but none of their texts have survived, or if they have, we don't have them. We haven't found them. And there are private collections all over the place that have been unexplored, even public collections that aren't, that haven't truly been explored. But that is etymology based.
Right.
It's not structured that when you add this pratyaya to this dhatu, you will get this word. And if you add this pratyaya to a similar dhatu, you will get this form, right? That's the structure that Pāṇini created. That he intuited and then codified. I guess we can also say it this way. But we don't see that before. We see hints of it, but we don't see that before.
I mean,
yeah.
I guess just not to push this too far, but if you're looking at poetry as Deven does, and you were able to get your hands on pre-Pāṇini poetry.
That's the Vedas.
And post.
Yeah,
Right,
that would be the Vedas, yeah.
Okay.
So the Vedas and Upanishads,
then the Sanskrit that came afterwards before it sort of died out.
Exactly.
I'm just wondering if
Yeah.
it got very Pāṇini'd.
Oh,
in some sense.
yeah, so, well, with regards to the Vedas, the rule is whatever is in the Vedas should not be touched. So the Vedas were all before Pāṇini, right?
Yes, of course.
And then we have some Upanishads that are a little bit, Upanishads and Puranas that are a little bit after Pāṇini, so they do have that effect. There are linguists who actually study this more specifically.
I was assuming.
Yeah. There are some phenomenal, I think, German and Dutch. We can discuss names afterwards if you're
No, I'd love to
interested.
learn.
But yeah, there are studies, yeah.
Anytime you codify anything, like even the invention of writing systems,
Yeah.
has such a profound impact on the evolution of the language itself. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious what the history is. But
Yeah.
anyway, we can talk later.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? We have time for maybe one quick question. Anybody in the audience? I'll bring you the mic before we break for lunch.
It's okay if you want to meditate on the question for the...
Yeah, there'll be time for questions after lunch. Deven and Mittal will be back with us at 2:15. We good? All right. Thank you.